5:30 for me.
All right, we got to. Never mind. Actually, why don't we get started? Since I've just heard that we have a couple members that may have to leave early, and as I said, we have a fairly large agenda. There's a couple of presentations that I think are an important part of the discussion, at least to kick us off. Just as a way to start this off, I'm Aaron Clausen, the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Beverly. The mayor's asked me to chair this committee, and so here I am. I'd first of all like to thank all of you who are attending and are participating on behalf of the mayor. You really appreciate your input and the time that we'll be asking you for to not only attend the meetings but provide your feedback and your expertise as we look at and find ways to reuse some of the municipal facilities that we have and will have available in the relatively near future. So I thought first thing we would do is just kind of go around and introduce ourselves, and I'll try to frame what this committee is being asked to do. And then we have a couple presentations by Troy Randall of AI3 to talk about the Briscoe Middle School and its existing condition. Presentation by Commissioner Mike Collins to talk about the City Hall and Police Station buildings downtown on Cabot Street. And then Brian Ailes is going to give a quick overview of the city's capital program. And that's probably going to take us for a full 2 hours. And I'm going to do my best to keep us down to 2. So, as I said, I'm Aaron Clausen. Kevin?
I'm Kevin Artunian, I'm Chief of Staff. Prior to my role, I was in commercial real estate for about 9 years.
Thad Samasco, local architect and also resident of Beverly.
Mike Wheeler, resident of Beverly, president and CEO of Beverly Bank.
Andy Goldberg, resident of Beverly, partner at Goldberg Properties.
I'm Brian Ailes. I'm the finance director for the city and also a resident.
Troy Randall, AI3 Architects.
Casey Sword, Cabot Theater.
Chris Silverstein, president of the Beverly School Committee.
John LaLasha, chief of police.
John Hall, I'm Beverly resident and business owner.
Greg St. Louis, city engineer.
Todd Surratt, Beverly resident. Mike Collins, Commissioner of Public Services.
And Steve Fredrickson, Director of Municipal Inspections.
Thank you. I see we have a couple more coming in. If you could introduce yourselves as you take your seats. Go, please. Go ahead.
Okay, get my breath. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Turkla. I'm chairman and founder of Brookwood Financial Partners, a private equity firm here in Beverly.
Thank you, Tom.
And I'm Jane Rice. I also work at Brookwood Financial Partners. I'm a partner of the firm and run our institutional sales and marketing and investor relations group.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to provide a very brief overview of what we're asking as the city to get your feedback and insight as to how we move forward with some of our capital planning. And then we're going to have some presentations. What I would ask is that we hold our questions until the end of the presentations, because as I said, we got a lot to go through. We'll try to leave some time at the end to talk both about what you're going to hear about as far as the existing buildings, also as the kind of scope of work of what we'll be trying to do in the near future. So generally speaking, what we're asking is to get your insight and help us and help the city understand how we should be using some facilities that are going to be either coming online soon or coming on made available because of the closing of the Briscoe School. So what we're really looking to create with this group is some recommendations around a 5 to 10 year plan for the municipal buildings, particularly 3 of them. One, the Briscoe building, which I already mentioned, the Briscoe School. And then once that becomes available, as the new construction of the middle school becomes complete and we make the transfer over, that's going to leave some open questions to other facilities that we have, the City Hall building downtown as well as the police station. So how do we utilize those buildings the best for the community, and what is the highest and best use for those properties potentially in the context of city operations? There's some general questions that I'd like to throw at you. Just to keep in mind as we hear these presentations and throughout the process. One is, do we keep all 3 buildings? Do we keep the Briscoe Middle School? Do we keep City Hall? Do we keep the police station? Understanding again the city's needs in terms of operations and capital planning. Do we surplus and sell one or more of the buildings? Do we keep a couple and transfer operations to one and for instance, Briscoe School, and make City Hall available for other higher and better uses. Are all municipal offices better utilized or more efficient under one roof? Is that something we need to be considering as we look at these buildings? The city needs a new police station. How does that fit into this conversation? And then finally, the final question that I'll just pose to you is the city will need space for the school administration offices in the future. How do we accommodate that in the context of our capital planning? So those are kind of the major questions. I see you jotting stuff down. I'm going to pass around these questions so you can keep them in front of you and add to it. So without further ado, what I'd ask is that Troy Randall, if you could give us a presentation of the Briscoe School. At the end, again, if there's any questions or if you'd like to add to some of these more general questions that we'd like to address as a committee, we can have a conversation around that. But please keep these in mind as we listen. Thanks. Troy?
Thank you, Aaron. Again, Troy Randall from AI3 Architects, and we have been working with the city for almost 2 years now with the new middle school project. And part of our charge at the very beginning of the process that started, as I mentioned, nearly 2 years ago, was to evaluate the existing Briscoe School, evaluate the memorial building as part of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the entity that is partnered with the city for this project, to take a look at the existing buildings, the conditions of the existing buildings, the site, and one of the things that that we'll go through is the amount of documentation that we provided to the Massachusetts School Building Authority back in November of 2014. It's these two binders here, one of many submissions to the MSBA through the process. It contains about 2,100 pages of information as part of the feasibility study, the evaluation of those two properties and the surrounding area. This feasibility study included a lot of documentation on the existing building with evaluation of the site plan, record and title of the property, existing floor plans, evaluation of those, existing conditions with the architectural review relative to the building codes, the energy codes, the accessibility codes, structural, mechanical, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, all of the trades involved with the building system, and as well as the a historical reference or historic analysis, and a phase one environmental site analysis, traffic analysis, and hazardous material survey within the building. So we have a number of consultants that have been working with us as part of the entire process to evaluate, and we're going to talk specifically about the Briscoe Middle School. One thing that's very important for everybody to think about as I'm talking through some of the evaluations and conditions is that as part of the MSBA, the process with the MSBA, is that we have to evaluate the building in light of it being a school building, it being a higher level evaluation or higher standard than it may be an evaluation for a municipality or just a developer as you look at the overall conditions. So we're going to be talking about the evaluation in an extreme condition, understanding that if, as part of the process with the evaluation of the MSBA and their involvement, they make sure and require that the building lasts 50 years. So we can't evaluate it on just a 20-year, 10-year, 5-year plan. It's got to be a school building and a high performance level for 50 years. So just keep in mind as I go through, some of these are going to be extreme in its review, but we have to do that as part of the process. So as we just a couple of examples, with looking at, like, a developer, as an example, may look at the building and say, you know, I can encapsulate some of the asbestos tiles. I can look at the site a little bit differently and develop it differently. I can maybe use some of the existing systems, or evaluate the existing structure and not modify portions of the building. A developer may not have to, or a developer does not have to bid the project under Chapter 149 with prevailing wages. So that has an effect on the overall assessment. But I'm not here to talk about developing or municipalities. I just say that because it extends the fact that we're looking at this building from a different lens. The site itself is 8.14 acres. It's an irregular site. There's a small package. It's a few pages from this set of documents you should have in front of you. It shows the site plan. Many of you, or all of you, are probably very familiar with the site. The building's four-story building, 144,300 square feet approximately, constructed in 1923, 1924. The exterior envelope, the building itself, the exterior walls, roof, windows, foundation. The foundation is a poured concrete foundation in relatively good condition, based on the fact that it's 90 plus years old. It's in very good condition. The exterior walls, it's a type of construction in 1923-24, standard for that vintage, that has an exterior brick white, the layer of brick on the exterior, and then it has a concrete masonry backup. It doesn't have any insulation within the exterior wall. It has definitely seen water infiltration over time. There has been a significant amount of work done to try to mitigate that, and repointing, as an example, of the masonry, the joints, replacement of the exterior windows in 1995 with insulated window systems. The roof, the rubber roof, the EPDM roof, was replaced in 1993. All of those are still beyond their life expectancy when looking at it from a school building construction project. The mechanical systems, the electrical systems, the plumbing, those systems are generally existing systems that far exceed their life expectancy. And there's a fire alarm system that was installed, but there's no sprinkler system within the building.
Troy, I'm sorry, can I interrupt for a second? Does everybody have that package?
No.
Do you have any extras?
You know what, I do not, but somebody could use this. I made 15 copies, not understanding the size of this group. My apologies.
So we'll do just real quickly. This is being recorded, as you can tell, on BevCam. We'll make the presentation available. We'll also make sure that this package of information is available online if you wanted to go back and remind yourself what Troy's mentioned. So sorry. Go ahead.
No problem at all. And just so you know, the 2,100 pages, if you really want to get into the details, that's online as well on the city website, so you can reference the entire document. This is just a small snapshot of what's in that document. The building, obviously vintage 1923, was built prior to any building codes, any energy codes, or accessibility codes before any of those were in place. So there have been a lot of things over time that have, with those codes, that have evolved that require updating if this building were to be renovated with accessibility, with the exterior envelope and the energy code, the windows, the roof, and with the just the building code in general. The I won't get into detail about the Phase 1 site assessment or the hazardous material assessment. The documents are in here. I can tell you that Phase 1 site assessment, which is a review of historic data related to the site conditions and the underground surfaces, any oil tanks, coal related materials, has been reviewed by our site and environmental consultants. It's a pretty significant document. That's within this series of documents. The hazardous materials, lead, asbestos materials, our consultant, Universal Environmental Consultants, went through the both buildings, and took 51 samples at Briscoe and identified suspect materials that are traditionally suspect with that type of vintage building, whereas floor tile or window caulking, things of that nature are also included within the spec. The traffic analysis, we did that. Not really anything that you may be concerned about or interested in based on the evaluation of the building, but that is also identified and explained in detail, all the information within this document. There's some cost data, because as part of the process of evaluating the school project with the again, the lens of a school project at Briscoe and also Memorial Building, the city reviewed 12 different options for the school building. So there's some baseline cost data relative to the Briscoe School with capital improvements, and there's some information on very conceptual and preliminary costs based on development, again, from a school perspective on the Briscoe site. So that is a big picture view of the Briscoe School, and turn it back over to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you, Troy. Why don't we continue with our analysis and review of municipal buildings? Mike, do you mind reviewing what you have?
Sure. I don't have a nice color 8x10 glossies with circles and arrows, but as part of the conversation, when we look at the assets that we have, if some of the long-term needs we have, we need a new police station because they've outgrown their current space, and as evidenced by the fact that the detective staff is not even in the building, which obviously presents a whole host of management issues if your staff is spread out amongst a number of buildings. City offices, as we know, are spread out throughout the city. Not everyone can fit within the confines of City Hall. So what our general plan has been, and this is nothing in stone, but what we've talked about for a number of years is at some point building a new police station after the middle school, build a new police station which will free up the police station space that's attached to City Hall. It was built at a later date, but attached to City Hall. And then renovate that police station space. So there's a cost associated with that renovation. There's a cost associated with the new construction of a police station. But that will allow us to put the police under one umbrella in a new facility, which they desperately need. In addition, with the renovated space at the rear of City Hall, we'd be able to bring inspectional services back into City Hall, and very likely, hopefully, also bring the Board of Health, the health inspectors back into City Hall. So if you are any sort of permit seeker, you could get all of your business done under one roof, which is very desirable, if you can find a place to park at City Hall, which is one of the shortcomings of the current facility, is that there's a half a dozen spaces or so on the property for the public to park at. City Hall is unlike a lot of city halls around the country, where most were built as a city hall, town hall, city hall. That was a dedicated building built for that purpose. We've got some guy's house. Is really what it is. It started life as John Cabot's house in the 1700s, but it was renovated for the purposes of being a town hall. It was dramatically expanded both in depth and in height in 1874 to become the town of Beverly's town hall. It was a 4-story structure at the time, and then in a subsequent renovation in the 1933, the 4th floor was removed, and the current configuration that you see today was derived. Fit the needs of the city pretty well, because we were a city by 1933, all these years, but it is very tight. It is an old building, as I said, started life in 1874, started life actually in 1780s, so some of the pieces of the building date back to then. We recently completed a full exterior renovation of the building, 100% repoint of all the brick. All the windows got rebuilt, new storm windows, brand new roof on the building. Police station got the same treatment. But we didn't really do any work on the interior of the building. And while the building is functional, it could certainly use an update from the wood grain paneling inside, and the current layout may or may not be the most efficient. We have an old steam heating system that needs to be dealt with in the very near future. So there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be addressed at City Hall in order to keep, even to stay in that space, we need to continue to invest in that property. The police station was added to the back of City Hall in 1938. It's structurally in fine condition. It's a very stout little building. But it's incredibly small for the amount of staff and the current needs of a modern police department. It's very awkward, to say the least, for their needs. And it's both City Hall and the police station have been adapted over time to their current use. So we make do with the best we can. There would be, like I said, if we do build a new police station, that has a cost. There's a cost of renovating the police station, the current police station, because it wouldn't make any sense to just move in for the inspectional services and whatnot. It would definitely make sense to take the time. There's a limited amount of things like the floor tiles are asbestos, so you'd want to take the time of the building being empty to renovate that, replace the electric system, the plumbing. It's all circa 1938, both the electric and the plumbing. The wiring is somewhat ad hoc because they didn't know what the internet was in 38 when the building was built, so we've got data cabling run anywhere we can. And it's currently outfitted as a police station, so hopefully we won't need cells in the building in the future.
I don't know, I want to keep that.
Yeah. Things like that. So the space would have to be refitted. It would also, now it being a public facility, would have to become handicap accessible, which it is currently really not. You can get into the ground floor from the front, but that's it. The lower level and the upper level are completely inaccessible to anyone that's with any sort of disability. So there's some significant costs there. One of the reasons that this conversation even exists is you have to acknowledge those costs, and in a long-term sense, weigh them against what if we were to go over to Briscoe or some other facility. Also recognize, and I'm sure Bryant will point out, that if we decided to go into a Briscoe to renovate that and make that into city offices, there'd be a significant several tens of millions of dollars to renovate that, would be my guess. But it would also not make available to us any sort of tax revenue forever. So that one of the ways to look at it is, in the big picture, is that if that were to become a taxable property, that would provide future growth to provide for expansion somewhere else, the new police station, whatever it is. I don't want to get too much into that because that's outside my wheelhouse, but overall we have two buildings, City Hall and the police station. that the exteriors are in very good condition currently, and the interiors in both buildings, if we had unlimited funds, should be fully restored. There's a lot of work to do inside. There's miles and miles of unused wiring in both buildings, and the plumbing is suspect at best. So both could really, to continue being used as city assets, would at some point need full interior renovations to go with the exterior renovations that we just performed. What we did went a long way to making both buildings much more energy efficient. But in order to squeeze any more efficiency out of the buildings, we really have to start investing in them.
Thank you. I think that covers it. Brian, if you can fill in, I think, the rest relative to the capital plan. And
Yeah, I can make a
we'll
few remarks
wrap it up.
about kind of the city's finances and where we're at, and certainly what we've been planning for. But I think if it hasn't been said yet, I think it's fairly evident that we're all here because there is no easy answer. I think there's no clear-cut decision as to what the right path forward is. And in addition to the historical value considerations and the community considerations and any personal preferences you might bring to the table, we've got to be prudent in looking at it through a financial lens as well. And some considerations that I throw on the table for you is the affordability of the renovations, whether that's renovating old buildings, whether that's the construction of the new buildings, certainly needs to be affordable, whatever the solution is. And a lot of that is not only the ultimate cost of the projects, but the timing of the projects, and I'll explain that in a minute. Also, the long-term cost of the maintenance of any buildings that we retain. That's also needs to be considered, as well as potential revenue that we may derive from any disposition of any of the assets, or any potential new growth from any development that occurs as a result of disposing of these assets. So for the affordability, I think it might be helpful to just explain a little bit in very high level how the city's structured revenue-wise. Over 80% of our revenue comes from the tax levy, which is capped at 2.5%. So that's a good and a bad thing. The bad thing is much of your growth is capped, and you don't have available resources in future years beyond that growth factor. The good part of that is it provides predictability for planning. And we've been very thoughtful in the city to not only plan for a lot of our capital investments out to the tune of 10 years, but also it helps us basically make decisions as we go, so that we're able to keep in mind the long-term implications of any decisions we're making. We've also been very thoughtful in the past few years to begin increasing our stabilization fund balance here. We created a policy whereby we're transferring 10% of excess cash every year into the stabilization fund. And what that's allowing us to do is take on additional debt associated with the middle school, which we'll be taking on debt with next year. That project is a $110 million project, as Troy might have stated. Of that $110 million, the city will be bonding $60 million of that. So that creates tremendous stress on our debt structure. So when we look out 10 years, what we're able to see is that roughly around 2021, 2022, we have the capacity to take on additional debt related to the police station, any decisions we make here or recommend out of this committee. And the other consideration that hasn't been mentioned tonight, but it's right behind the police station and City Hall in Briscoe, is the Public Works Department has some space considerations as well. So right now in our long-term capital planning, obviously we've got assumptions built into those projections, and they're very conservative because we don't want to find ourselves in a bind. And we'll know a lot more over the next 1 to 2 years when we begin permanently bonding for the middle school. If rates remain where they're at, we will have capacity to take the time frame we're talking about and escalate it a little bit and begin these investments sooner than we're anticipating right now. And I can share the city's long-term capital structure with you so you get a sense of kind of when we have previous projects falling off of our debt schedule and when we anticipate bringing on new debt. So aside from the 80% of our revenue that's capped at 2.5%, the availability for growth really comes from an area called new growth, and it's essentially when properties are developed or go on the tax rolls, and it creates the ability to grow beyond that 2.5% of the tax levy every year. So obviously, any decision that creates additional new growth is something that continues year after year and is available to the city to either invest in a solution here or to support core services. I think I've touched on most everything, but I'm happy to answer any specifics if people want to dive in a little deeper on anything I've said.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So that concludes the presentations. And I think we actually have a fair amount of time to throw some questions out. Brian, you have one other?
Yeah, could I just add one more thing that I didn't mention is in our planning model, I talk about bringing on debt for the police station. We've always just kept an earmark in our planning of about $20 million for that in terms of debt coming on the books for the city. And depending upon what the rates are at and what happens in the next 4 years budgetarily, that can shift up or down, depending upon the needs of the city too.
So we're going to open it up for some questions, and again, I'm just going to reiterate some of the questions that I posed earlier on in the meeting. Keep in mind that we're trying to answer these as we explore some of these the issues we're up against. So again, these buildings we're talking about, the Briscoe Middle School, police station, City Hall. Do we need to keep all three? Do we consolidate operations, as Mike talked a little bit about? Do we, we know that the police need a new station, but is it a new facility, or is it within an existing building that we have? And what does that mean in terms of cost? And then also thinking about the school administration, knowing that at some point in the future, we're going to need to find a place for them as well. So keep those in mind as we ask some questions, and please also pose others as they come across. Andy?
Is there any state money available for any of this?
I think that's
Not that we've seen. The biggest resources are typically geared towards public safety. They usually have the greatest grant resources, and not usually in this currently. There's not a whole lot of grant programs out there.
I had a similar question with regard to the historical value. Is there anything in that would get you money to, given that both those built City Hall and Briscoe of historical significance? Is there any grant money there that might?
There might be. So if I can add on some of those grant questions, there's not a lot. I agree with Mike on that question. Mike mentioned that we are a green community and have used funding from the state to invest in some of our buildings, including City Hall and I believe the police station.
In our schools.
For energy efficiency. That's funding that we might be able to use. There are historic funds through Mass Historic that you might be able to take advantage of. Tax credits are not necessarily available to us because we're a nonprofit organization, but that might be available if we talk about selling one of the properties to a private developer. They would have access potentially for historic tax credits, but there's a process around that as well. But maybe that's one of the things we need to look at as a committee. Those are just three areas. I'm not aware of any kind of one-stop shop grant program that helps municipalities, whether it's a town or city, to build out its capital needs, except for schools.
If there is any money, it's typically a small amount of money for historic preservation in the grand scheme of things. Town of Danvers renovated their town hall a few years ago, Peabody maybe a decade ago, and I think it was 100% on their back. I don't believe they got much of any outside funds, and both of those buildings are significant historic buildings as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are a community preservation community. So there are funds that are available for historic preservation there as well. And we could use that for a building like Briscoe or City Hall. So there are some funds, but it's really, I think you're looking at cobbling together a number of resources. There's not one single source.
Brian, have you guys already done an assessment of the cost of each of these scenarios, or is that part of what comes out of this committee?
I think we've got to do a little more work. The biggest piece that we've done is with the Briscoe Middle School doing the assessment, and there are some dollar figures attached with that. What we need to do is go through and figure out what of those costs relate specifically to the schools and our requirements by MSBA, and what can we kind of do without. And the other piece to that is with Mike Collins, who knows our buildings inside and out, really getting a sense of what would be kind of the reasonable investments in the future for City Hall to keep it afloat or to renovate it.
Does it include what a different use and a taxable use would be to offset any of those, or have you not gotten that part?
We know generally what revenues would be derived from a development there. Right now, it's off of the city's tax rolls. So the second it goes onto the city's tax rolls, that's new growth. That's added value, even if it's only assessed at $1 million or $2 million. If a development goes in, just to give you some rough figures, if it's a residential type development, for every $5 million in value, it brings in an extra $72,000 a year to the city in perpetuity. If it's a commercial or industrial related type development that's valued at $5 million, it would bring in about $132,000 annually, which isn't insignificant when you're talking about debt service, because it's obviously significantly less per year than the investment would be.
Sure. Mike?
How much square footage, I mean, how much building do you need? What's the need of the city from a building perspective?
You compare, what'd you say, 144,000 square feet at Briscoe. It's a big space. Right now, City Hall is under 20,000 square feet total. So
you have a significant amount of excess capacity there.
Yeah, even if you brought everybody else in, you're almost like, on one or two floors of the building.
Right.
And I can't stress enough how everything at Briscoe needs to be replaced. I mean, 100% of the electrical, 100% of the plumbing, 100% of the HVAC. We're gonna get that building through in good shape to the end of its useful life, but the minute the kids are out of there, we're shutting her down, and that's it. I mean, it needs everything.
Can I ask one follow-up question real quick? Is there any other usable raw land where something could be built that the city either owns or has access to?
Yeah, there is property, and correct me if I'm speaking out of turn, there's property on Cummings Center that is set aside for public service or public safety facility.
Right, but won't meet the expectations of all the other buildings
Would
coming
not.
together under one.
Correct.
So there is no other land other than that one spot.
You'd have to look at things like, there are pieces of land around the city. There's a couple of pieces of land. Each one has its own problems. City does own some land up the airport. If we were to use that, we would have to get permission from the FAA and pay rent on it, and it's, even though we own it, there's the landfill, of course. So there's the rest of the pieces of land that we own around the city are generally either park or conservation or cemetery or something like that. So we don't own a lot of big pieces of land.
Yeah, the landfill's probably the largest one that we have that's not restricted as an open space, but there's other challenges to it as far as access, and it's a landfill. There's development challenges along with that. Dad?
It's a pretty large committee, and I'm wondering if there's a way to outline the process, maybe with some milestones. I mean, all the points are good. It seems like we'd want an inventory of available land, inventory of square footages that we have, inventory of needs, so that we could and inventory of tax revenue from various, so that we could make, informed decisions. I'm not sure if I know it was called the Temporary Reuse Committee. I like that term personally. So I'm wondering if you had a sense of how many meetings this might be, and we could work our way toward from multiple options down to a few good ones and obviously get community input.
Yeah, this is certainly, it was called a temporary committee because we didn't envision this as an ongoing commitment. I think what we would like to do is certainly identify what are the needs, what are the facilities that we have available, and what those options might be, and talk through them. We can put together some of that data for you. I do think it makes sense to, if people are available, to break up into subcommittees or working groups to address specific issues. I'm thinking, this could be a committee that works for over the next 3 to 4 months, maybe a little bit longer if we have to. But tonight was really first to get a sense of what are the big picture issues, maybe identify some of that information needs. So I think it would be good to kind of brainstorm that a little bit now, without getting us too far into the night. But as you said, what are our needs in terms of square foot, in terms of operations, what's available to us, I think are all pieces of information we want to gather.
Thank you.
Janet Crisos, I don't think we've met.
Thanks, Janet.
But I echo what Dad says. I think that it's important that we don't just look at building reuse, but we're looking at the program as well. Whoever's to make the decisions. For instance, a public safety building or police headquarters, it's not just how many square feet you have now, but what is appropriate for a comparable city in this day and age. So I think you have to work from both ends, and it's totally proper to have respect for budgetary constraints, but you have to plan to the program and then design to a budget. So it's important not to get pigeonholed right now into exactly what we think we want to do. And then also maybe separate the building reuse from the actual sites. I mean, Briscoe maybe should come down, but it may be a very valuable location that you should think about not giving away so lightly. Or maybe one thought is to maybe have a developer build something that we lease a big chunk back, a kind of a P3 arrangement. So just a few thoughts.
Thank you. I think the program comment is an important one, and Mike alluded to this. As we look at opportunities to consolidate offices, the one that I'm used to and I actually think is rather important is combining or bringing together planning, inspectional services, and the health department, because there's a lot of value, at least from the private sector side, from the developer side, to be able to come to one floor in one building to get all the answers they might need. So there's absolutely a lot of value to talk about program. We should certainly consider that as we go forward. Sure.
2 questions. One is the buildings that have historic designations, are developers who buy them precluded from tearing them down and building whatever they want?
So I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head if Briscoe is a designated historic building under Mass Historic or a federal designation. It doesn't automatically. If there's state or federal funds, as I understand it, if there's state and federal funds involved, there would be a review process. If there are not state or federal funds involved, or permit, then a developer could raise the building.
Because those kind of considerations would either lessen interest or change the pricing from a private developer, and therefore not maybe command the best price to the city if you were to sell it. So I'm just curious about that. Second is, for how long do you do your capital budgeting? What period of time?
10 years we go out.
10 years?
Yeah.
And what's the longest term of your debt?
28 years by law. And those are some of our major buildings, school buildings, pretty much.
Got it. So you've projected out what enrollments might be in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, what police station uses, what square footage might be needed by the different various departments. So you're looking out just beyond the immediate time frame?
Yeah, more so in the school department when you talk about projected enrollments and stuff. That's part of the process before we go to any state agency and request funds. They want to make sure we're being thorough in our planning. But in terms of needs and population growth, Aaron, do we, as part of some of our work with the state economic, do we do those kind of projections?
So we will be. The city just hired a consulting firm to complete a housing plan, comprehensive housing plan, and they will do a projection, a growth projection in terms of households and residential, total residents. out, I want to say, is it 20 years? 20 years. 20 years. So we don't have that number with us right now, but we'll have a very firm projection within the next 2 to 3 months.
And are you currently compliant with regard to housing set aside for lower or moderate income people?
Yeah, you're referring to the 40B regulation. For those who don't know, that means every city or town must meet 10% of their housing stock to be considered affordable at the low or moderate income rate, which is up to 80% of area median income. We're at 12% or near 12%, so we're compliant. That means that we're not subject to an unfriendly 40B special permit approval process. It's important for the community to retain that because it retains control over development going in the future. If we're subject to that unfriendly 40B, we lose a lot of control and we can get a development that doesn't fit our master plan, doesn't fit our objectives. So we're safe from that sort of thing. The other side to that too is that we have a number of affordable units available to the community. It's an important part of our economic development and housing strategy. So there's a positive side to that too.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Todd Surratt. For the last 10 years or so, I've been doing what we call facility assessments. Our clients are anybody that has large numbers of buildings, large numbers of square footage, large maintenance budgets that they don't necessarily maximize, and they want to spend money smarter. So when I hear Bryant talk about 10-year master planning of financials, I wonder if there's a similar program that talks about city-owned properties. I know we're here on the hotspot of 3 specific buildings, but is there a larger picture that I just haven't seen yet because I'm kind of a new guy?
Brian, do we get into the
No.
with the capital plan?
That's the answer?
No. That's kind of why we're here.
Yep.
This is an opportunity to fill in some of the information that we don't have. I think it's
And again, we're here for the hot 3 buildings, but, you know, when I visited the city barn, so I can see dominoes falling really fast, so to speak.
it is an interrelated question, so it's a fair point.
Yeah.
It's something we
Is
can
there
look
a
at.
bigger picture, even though we're focusing on these 3? Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, are there strong opinions as to what the community thinks the town should do that have already percolated, or is that really post what we're doing here?
I haven't heard anything since personally haven't heard anything since the committee was posted. We've talked a little bit about a process whereby the community could provide input and at the very least have easy access to the information that this committee will have. For instance, we've talked about having a separate webpage similar to our 1A project where it would be kind of a portal of information. We'd have this video available to the public. We'll make available the report that Troy talked about, both reports that we can make those available, and the possibility to receive comments and kind of consolidate that to get a sense of what do people think that there's a need for. But I think it's important to get the public's comment and build this into the larger context and what are the limits on resources and needs.
Just one question, one more if I may. Do you have a time frame by which this you hope to accomplish this decision?
Yeah, I think it would be great if we could get a strong recommendation from this committee in the next 3 to 4 months, but we haven't really set a timeline. We haven't set an end date. We would like to move forward fairly quickly, but if we need to dig into this more, if the picture gets a little bit bigger because there are other buildings that we need to think about, other capital assets that we need to think about, program that we need to build into that conversation, I think we can extend that a little bit.
Could I just add to that, Aaron? The real kind of time frame that's prompting this discussion is that we're anticipating vacating Briscoe Middle School by the fall of 2018, when the students will then be at the new Beverly Middle School. So that's when the potential surplus could occur if that's what the committee decided to do, or some other.
And you don't forecast any need to need that school back as a school in the foreseeable future?
No. Is that fair? Well.
Yeah, I think our new middle school is going to take care of our middle school needs quite well.
And
we're adding grade 5 to that, which will relieve some of the burden on our elementary schools for space, so.
Right. And we do have one elementary school right now that's housing the administration for the school department. So if what we decide here incorporates that office as well, that would free up another elementary school for excess capacity.
Well, that's used partly now for preschool.
Is it about
So
half?
It's anticipated that we may need to use more of it for preschool.
And it's the
down
same,
line.
I'm sorry, is the same thing true for municipal offices as well in terms of forecasted future growth, space needs? And you mentioned City Hall and others, and consolidating some of the other departments together? You've kind of forecasted out space needs.
I think part of what we need to do here and with the department heads is a little bit more of that. I think part of it factors into what we think our population growths will be in terms of the public safety needs and whether there's, depending upon what type of development we anticipate in the next few years, whether there's denser parts of the city that might require a stronger public safety presence, whether that's fire, police. But in terms of our, city operations, I don't want to speak for the mayor. He's actually right here. You might want to speak to this, but we're committed to delivering, the service level that citizens are used to seeing in the city. So we don't anticipate any large variation from that in the future.
Thank you.
It's easy enough to imagine that if one were to bring in a consultant and look at the space planning needs of City Hall using established standards for office space, I would safely bet that, say we're in 16,000 square feet, I bet you it'd be 50% bigger than that is the space that we probably should be in for the amount of staff that's in the building. Because there's, we'll just have one room with 3 or 4 people working in it together with no partitions, no nothing. So that's, it works. I mean, we make do, and we'll make do for a long time doing that, but it's not optimal. So if you were to say, if all things being equal, what would we need? We'd probably need a decent chunk more space, and I agree with Bryant, long term, we would probably try to maintain a similar staffing level for a significant time into the future. And as far as an overall picture, the capital plan is about as comprehensive a document as we have. It looks as far forward as anything, and it talks about some of these long-term needs, like a police station, and like a new public works facility. So there is somewhat of a capital guide for the city for some distance out to the future, but we don't have the benefit of having brought in a consultant and looked at all of the city's needs and tried to identify everything. Basically, the capital plan is if you don't raise your hand, it doesn't get into the plan. So,
If a private developer built a structure for the city and we leased it back, would the private developer be held to the same standard of prevailing wages and everything else that the city would be?
I believe the answer to that is yes, but we can find out for sure. I wouldn't want to be too definitive at this point, but my understanding is that would be the case. Mike,
I don't know.
If it was built for the city and leased back.
It's a simple enough question to ask Salem because they keep doing it.
Right. But there could be a significant amount of savings from a development potential. If it's $20 million over this period of time, there's a lot of money to be saved and paid back in lease versus a capital.
You can safely bet that if you built the same project, if we built it and a private developer built it, it's going to be about a third cheaper.
No, I'm keenly aware of the cost difference, and that's why, that third, is that better paid in lease payments from a city perspective, from a cash flow perspective, versus paying it in the capital budget? I don't know.
That's a question we'll answer.
In some cases that, like at UMass Lowell, they had a private developer. They did have to use prevailing wage. They did have some other, I think have some other ways that the requirements were eased, but they did have prevailing wage. But I think it would depend on how much of the project it is too. But if you're building a municipal facility, you've got to follow
Yeah, I
the
think if
rules.
you were building standalone, I would totally agree. But if you were to take Briscoe and say we were to rent 10% of it,
Right, it's different.
and that might weigh into.
What's the current differential in prevailing wage? Just out of curiosity.
Third.
Well, the public sector can build things roughly for about 2/3 of the cost that we can.
And most of it's in labor?
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm not exactly sure where this wage is prevailing, but that's what we pay.
Comparable to union wages.
Oh, okay, it is comparable.
That's a question we'll dig into. I think if I understand it, what's the scenario if it's a standalone build lease back to the city, or if it's a build lease back portion of the city?
What's the percentage? So if it's 51%,
Right.
that has to be prevailing wage, it's 49, I mean, just to understand the differential.
I think there's also a procurement element to that. That was the specific problem at UMass Lowell. It was a dorm.
Right, but I know other cities are doing it, but not for their entire municipal offices.
Yeah, Salem, I read, is going to be doing it again. They're at 120 Washington, which was a private
Right.
venture, and then now they're going to go across the street from City Hall with those annexes. And they'll be fit out specifically for them.
For them, right.
So I don't learn a little bit from them.
What's the approximate size of the property at Cummings that is earmarked for public safety building?
2 acres.
2? Thank you.
Is that the parking lot?
Between the railroad and Elliott, and right in that corner.
Related to that, some years back, I think I was on a joint police-fire study group that looked at that site, and there's probably a lot of data we could mine, if nothing else, what the police department's needs were back then, and maybe even the viability of that site in terms of response times and that kind of thing. So part of our, in my mind, part of our data gathering in the beginning should be to find some of these bits of information and see if there's some value in looking back at them. Maybe we'll have learned something from what we did back probably 15 years ago.
I have the architectural drawings from 2004.
Yeah.
Do we have a population growth study? You expect to take into consideration all the developments that's happening?
That's
Yeah,
the
so-
housing one. Well, you can go.
We do. So part of the housing study is going to provide a projection over 20 years, and
That's the new study that we-
that's based on in-migration, out-migration, births. We'll also supplement that with all the current development that we have going on. There's in the pipeline something like 200, 250 units that are either under construction or permitted. But what we can do, and we'll make available with all this other documentation, we call it a development scorecard, but it lists out the development projects that are permitted or under permitted process. So we can build into that. The projection builds in not only just changes in demographics, but also actual new construction.
Does it take into consideration the opportunity for additional growth? So if the road ever gets up, the off-ramp 120, if that ever gets put up, or some other projects like the ones going on Cummings for the condos, or if there's several other opportunities downtown for developers to build significant buildings, does that take that into consideration?
It's not necessarily a build-out analysis. What you're talking about is a build-out analysis that looks at our zoning and says, here's what you could do under zoning, and gives you a number of total square feet in office, industrial, residential. What it'll do is it'll take past experience, past 5-10 years in terms of population change in the city of Beverly, and then in the state, I believe as well, to build a 20-year horizon based on the demographic change. It's not a straight build-out analysis.
Because that'll have significant impact on public safety and public works and everything else, right? So if you have a 20% increase in population, the size of the unit should be, it's always better to build a little bit for tomorrow than just kind of what we need today. You see that a lot in municipalities that build a school. The school, by the time it's done, is already at capacity and they're worried about the next step. So, and just from a water standpoint, if the dollar amounts are marginal, it'd be an opportunity for us to think a little bit outside the box.
Related to that, I've in a couple of communities in which I've lived over the past 20 years, there's been a huge anti-growth mentality because of its impact on multifamily units and having lots of kids come to the schools. And I'm sorry, I'm a neophyte here in Beverly, but what has the town's position been on new development? Both single family as well as multifamily. I mean, is it encouraging it? Does it want it? Does it discourage it? Do you have capacity in school systems?
So one of our primary economic development objectives is to grow development downtown, in particular, transit-oriented development around our depot station along Rantoul and Cabot. But what we're looking for is mixed use development, so there's a retail, commercial component to it, typically on the ground floor. We are looking to grow residential units. We want to bring more residents downtown to support the redevelopment of our main streets, create vibrant, active downtowns, supporting the businesses and a lot of the cultural institutions that we have. So we're very supportive of that kind of development. So you'll see that there are a number of projects happening downtown that are bringing those kinds of projects. So Wendover Development is just approved and under construction for a 72-unit mixed-use facility with about 6,000 square feet of commercial space right across the street from Depot Station. So that's something that we encourage a lot. It needs to be designed right. It needs to. We want to make sure that it mitigates impacts. To your point, or I guess question about what's the impact in terms of schools, multifamily projects, as we looked at it, really don't bring a lot of students, if any, to the school system. I think when we did an analysis to answer this question relative to the McKay School, so you might know that we put that out to RFP about 2 years ago, Wendover redevelopment for 32 units, 32 residential units. We did an analysis around that to understand what would be the impacts to the schools. In multifamily projects, over 60 units typically bring maybe one student or two for the whole project. So multifamily or urban projects really haven't historically brought children. Single family subdivisions are a different story. You'll see a lot more students brought in under that kind of development. We're not a no growth. We're not in a no growth posture relative to subdivisions. What we would like to see is that it's targeted to the areas where there's already infrastructure to serve that. And then we're also looking, so we have priority development areas, which is downtown. We have priority development areas around Cherry Hill, Sawyer Tozier for economic development around office and R&D, light advanced manufacturing. And then we have priority preservation areas. So, where we want to preserve open space, even though, residential development might be allowed in some of these districts, we're looking to preserve that. And those areas are typically characterized by poorly served utilities or infrastructure, or are part of a larger environmental or ecological asset or recreational asset. So.
And then you have, with all the new schools being constructed, this one included, you have capacity?
Yes, or we have capacity for what's. I guess let me rephrase the question to you, Chris. I don't want to answer that. The new school will provide enough capacity for the students, is the question.
Well, help me out, Mr. Mayor. Our projected enrollments, when we get them from NESDEC, are sometimes true and sometimes not. When it comes down to we get to that year that they've projected for us, this building, I think, has brought more students into the district. We have a choice cap right now, but I think having a new middle school will also keep more students in our public schools versus students leaving for private schools. So it's hard to tell, I think.
You really want me to speak?
Go for it, Mayor.
So as Aaron Clausen, our planning director, talked a bit about transit-oriented development, and you mentioned the McKay School. The McKay School have 21 bedroom units, 12 two-bedroom units. A lot of the focus in the TOD development downtown and around the depot and down towards the waterfront and hopefully along the Bass River will be focused on 1 and 2 bedroom units in multifamily settings, which tend to bring very few kids. They tend to be very popular living accommodation options for empty nesters, retirees, young professionals, folks maybe before they've started a family or maybe as they're starting a family. So they don't tend to bring a lot of kids. We do recognize that there'll be a certain amount of movement from our single-family neighborhoods of empty nesters who choose to sell their home and move into new housing downtown. So there will be some increase in young families moving into single-family neighborhoods. We believe that will be that'll be in a measured way over time, so it won't put a big demand on the schools. We will be tracking that as we go, though, as we approve TOD development downtown. The high school, the school we're in, was built for roughly, there's a number that MSBA puts to a school in terms of capacity, and that number is essentially, what have we heard again and again, Troy, about 80%?
Correct.
So it was built for 1,300. It can handle, we got about 1,340 or so kids in here this year. It can handle a significant number more. The middle school will be built for 1,400 students. It will be able to handle some number more. By moving fifth graders to the middle school, that will open up roughly 17 classrooms at the elementary school level for fewer grades. So as we look ahead to our school enrollments, we think we're in good shape, but we'll be tracking that as we go. And as the housing study that we've just commissioned and are kicking off now will help to show, that'll show what the need is for the community going forward and how we might provide it. But the question's a great one, Tom, because it starts to speak to what do we do with assets we currently hold, and we don't want to make a decision to surplus a property and regret it in 10 years or 15 years. So that's a part of the calculation that we're going through with all this. So thanks.
If I could just add some data to illustrate the change in demographics and how growth impacts or may not impact the schools or the population generally. So MAPC, it's the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, is a regional planning agency for the Boston metro region, for which we are one of 101 communities. Conducted a study for the city around the Bass River to look at what are the right land uses to this idea that the mayor mentioned, transit-oriented development by a depot station by the river as a redevelopment opportunity. And any good planning study does an existing conditions analysis to understand what's the current situation, what's the trend over time. And so the study looked at two kind of areas. One was the target area and one was the study area. The study area was a half mile radius around the depot station, over 400 acres of land. And they looked at the demographics within that area. In 2010, there was 9,000 residents living within that half-mile radius of the depot station. This includes much of Rantoul up to Cabot, and does get into Roughside a little bit. In the 2010 census, population decreased in the area from 9,000 to 8,500. There was actual population decrease over that time where there has been development and increased number of units. And what that illustrates is the changing demographics in terms of households. We were once, not long ago, our households were 2.7 people per household unit. Now we're just over 2 or less in some areas of the city. So I think that that data point illustrates the kind of development that we're seeing, particularly in the downtown, is not really the kind of development that brings school-age children. It's usually, as the mayor said, it's empty nesters, it's young professionals. And really, as we see more development, I think what we're going to see is the population growing back, particularly in this area, to what it was once in 2000, maybe 1990. It's not intended to mean that's what's happening citywide. It's just illustrative of that kind of development and what the impacts are on city services are. Any other questions about what we've heard tonight? Any additional information that we'd like to hear? I think what I would like to do at this point is maybe not go through a comprehensive list of data or reports that we would make available to the committee. That I heard you reference, what is the total square footage of need for the city? What do we have existing now? What potentially would we need, even though we're not seeing huge growth in terms of number of employees for the city, but there's a space need because we're already we're undersized as it is. So build in some information into that data. Greg?
With our GIS system, we can compile a list of city properties and what their square footages are, both of the building and of the land.
To that point, do you have other properties that are excess properties that you could sell that you don't need, you could raise money from doing so? So really nothing excess?
Really?
No. We just put out to bid a little while ago, empty or a vacant parcel of land by the airport, but that was essentially, as I recall going through that analysis, the last one that was really available. But that would be, we'll put together a list of the properties and maybe put together a map that we could look at.
We've done that query for the bus deal.
Mayor?
Yes, I think it probably bears stating that the city owns a good number of properties, but we own cemeteries, we own, we own parks, playgrounds, beaches, we own protected open space. We are extremely limited in terms of parcels that would have potential for development or potential for seeing a real value in surplusing and selling.
Right.
So we should make that land inventory available to this committee. Let's just make sure that when we do, everybody understands what they're looking at, and they don't look at the cemetery and say, that's a good amount of acreage, without realizing it's a cemetery.
Yeah.
So, because we are extremely, we're not without land assets, but we don't have a significant portfolio of land that we could choose to go in different directions with than that land is already being used for.
Right. And we can put together a map that actually would show you by color what it's used for and whether or not it's restricted for open space or cemeteries or what have you. So we can make that clear so it's not misleading.
One other thing I haven't heard at all, there's a lot of discussion of square footage and such here, but Briscoe also has a very historic and unique auditorium that apparently was modeled after Boston Symphony Hall. So there's, is there any value to that? I mean, we shouldn't forget that there's that and other sort of historical value to Briscoe that might
I think if it did,
on its own.
if I may, Aaron, I think if it didn't have that, we wouldn't even be talking about it. I think that's about the only redeeming feature of the building, that and we own it.
Yeah.
And I think, and maybe Troy, you could tell me that, or one of the other architects in the room could tell me that after a renovation, much of what we find charming about that space would not be remotely code compliant. The seating certainly isn't with current standards, so a lot of that would go away and it would be much more of a sterile environment.
I think the point you're making, John, though, is important, that we have the same consideration for City Hall.
Right.
It's a historically significant building within a historic district. The difference between Briscoe and City Hall is that Briscoe is not in a historic district. What I can do is part of the information gathering, see what we have available in terms of historic survey data, if the building's ever been surveyed, and detail some of the assets from the historic perspective. We can pull that and make that available as well. So I don't want to miss anything because, when we get back together, I'd like to have this available, make it available to you before we meet. Any other big picture questions that you would like answered? Maybe not now, but in the future.
Is there a budget for all of this that's already been set?
A budget for?
The redevelopment and/or reuse of the properties?
There's some flexibility, and we'll know more in the coming year to 2 years when we permanently bond for the middle school, because that will create excess capacity to possibly use this. But right now in our long-term planning, we've got a $20 million price tag on the building of a new police station, which is essentially an earmark about 8 years out. That's not to say that we couldn't borrow a little bit more than that.
That's $20 million for a new one, or for renovation?
That was the assumption of the previous administration, and we kept that in our long-term planning. But I think that's really the hope of this committee, is to solve that puzzle and maybe put a more accurate price tag with it that I can use in my planning process, and we can use it in our planning process.
Does that include somebody mentioned before about a new public works building? Is that the one and the same, or is that?
That's something different.
That's an addition?
Yeah, that's an addition.
Is there a number that you guys have floated for that?
That's a few more years out, because as I'll illustrate, and I'll share it with all of you, as our debt begins to fall off from some of our older schools that we remodeled 20 years ago, it creates excess capacity in our debt budget. to layer in the police station component that we've been earmarking, the middle school debt, as well as the public safety facilities. So we've got a price tag on that right now of about, I think we've got it at 15 million. See, I might have that here, Tom.
And just out of curiosity, what would be the combined square footages of those two buildings? In an ideal world, not with 6 people per office and...
For which two buildings?
The police station and the public works buildings.
I don't know what the current police station facility that we have plans for incorporated a certain aspect of the fire service functions in it. And I think that is probably up in the air at this point. It's certainly going to be a police station. Whether it has fire service components to it, I think is a decision that needs to be made. But that's
That'd be a
just
third
me.
thing then?
What's that?
That'd be a third thing then, public works, police and fire? What I'm getting at here is what do you think your square footage needs are with everything you would need in the next 30 years for public works, police and fire?
Right. We know what the square footage of the existing police station is. We know what the existing square footage of the off-site police services that we have at a building up towards the airport. And I would say that those are on the low side, so we would need to kind of talk with the chief and figure out how much more space he might need beyond what the existing facility is. And I think that's something we can, put together in short order and get it back to the committee.
And the public works needs are less, as you can imagine, they're less about office space and more about acreage. We need a couple of more acres of space to facilitate the operation that we currently have.
So what we'll do, I think you're bringing up great questions to help kind of frame the conversation. We'll go back and we'll pull together some scenarios. Bryant, maybe that makes sense with Mike and some other departments to understand what are the space needs. And I think it's not a hard number. It probably is a range, right? Of what we need and what we would love to have, and somewhere.
I'm sure everyone knows this, and if you don't know what I do, I buy and I own Cherry Hill, and so I buy and build commercial. And you are dealing with the most historic interest rates in the history of finance. And the extent to which you can front-end some of your stuff, you can do mathematical models that will show you saving a whole lot of money between now and when interest rates revert to a mean. You're talking about financing things with 2s and 3s in front of them and not 8s and 9s. And it's a financial calculation, but that's why I've been asking a lot of questions about what your needs are over an extended period of time, because this is truly historic. I'm sure you know it. You've commented a couple of times on excess bonding capacity just because of where interest rates are.
Right.
And so I'm just throwing that in the pot.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Aaron, we do have a needs assessment and space planning assessment for public works, so.
So we'll include that.
Not that that's really, it's good to know in the big picture, but in terms of, it factors into your cash flow, but it doesn't really factor into Briscoe.
Right. Part of the bigger picture. I think the point you're
Leads right into it. That's kind of why I asked the question.
Good point. Yeah.
I don't think anyone wants us at Briscoe.
How about City Hall? Okay. Any other questions that we need to go back and answer? All right. Go ahead,
Did
Chris.
the question about the cost of renovating Briscoe as a school versus a non-school make it onto your list?
Yeah, so Troy, you were talking about the standard of analysis for Briscoe is different because you were analyzing it as a school. Does your analysis talk about what that might mean if it was being analyzed as a municipal building? Did you get, not at all? Okay.
No, that isn't part of the evaluation, isn't part of the conversation. It was purely looking at renovating that building and frankly expanding it twice the size it is now as a middle school. So that was the charge and the calculation.
But if I recall, Troy, it was in a level of detail that we might be able to kind of extract some of the necessary pieces that would be required if we kept it as a municipal office, right?
Yeah, there's some information that you could probably pull. There's a baseline, just raw capital improvements that would need to be executed over a period of time that, based on whether that's a roof, windows, exterior envelope, building systems, it goes down the list, ADA compliance. There's a spreadsheet in the documentation, and I can pull that out and isolate it and send it off to you so that the group can have it. It identified about a $22.5 million price tag based on Chapter 149 bidding and what a very conceptual need would be for just capital improvements, purely capital improvements. So that spreadsheet we can certainly send off to you.
And does that number change, the $22.5 million? Does that change if it's not considered for a school? Or is that
That's purely basic capital improvements, yeah. Whether it's a school or any other function, it's purely building needs. And it doesn't provide an analysis of improvements, meaning if it's a school or a mixed use or residential, there's no comparison. It's purely capital improvement projects.
Are there any strong town contingencies that want to keep Briscoe and renovate it? So is that also at work, or? Doesn't sound like a lot of people are excited to do anything that's going to renovate it.
I think in the community there is.
In the community.
I haven't heard much here, but there
I'm
is.
just wondering, I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not sure if everybody heard the question. The question was, is there a strong interest or any interest to preserve Briscoe?
Right, given the cost of what it's going to take to make it up to code and all the renovations that will be needed. Yeah.
And John, you had a comment?
I think in the community there is, yeah. I think people consider it an important building.
To keep it, regardless of whether it's a school.
Well, yeah.
Mayor, go ahead.
I would say, good.
Not necessarily as a municipal building. I mean, I think if it was a developer and did a nice project with it, I think the community would go okay with that. But, it's something that keeps the architectural sort of integrity of it.
I would say that there's a lot of enthusiasm for things like moving City Hall and a new police station to Briscoe. If that could be coupled with a highly successful next use of what's currently City Hall as something like a downtown inn, because there's also a concern with leaving a hole in downtown, because we don't want to do that. I would say that the lack of enthusiasm that you might be hearing at the table is because some of the folks who've been working with the existing conditions at Briscoe and looking hard at the numbers of what it will take, what it will take to bring Briscoe into the, up to code, up to standard and use it going forward is daunting. But that's, but let's dig at those numbers more carefully and let's compare them against, what might be gained by, whether there are some options that bring different types of funds into the mix for the building itself. There has been an assumption. There was a point in time where proceeds from a sale of Briscoe were built into the capital plan to help finance the middle school. We removed that from the capital plan last year, just wanting to keep open and alive the thought that Briscoe might have a future use other than to surplus it and sell it. But I think that whole range of questions that are being asked, all that data, all that information that people are looking for to help us get a better handle on what's possible. Hey, it would be fantastic if the outcome of this is conditions at all three of these buildings are such that we ought to hold on to them all, that we identify creative ways to finance rehabbing them and using them going forward. That would be fantastic. We may find, and it may be a great outcome, that we determine that one or more of these buildings are meant to be held onto as city assets and one maybe surplus, and maybe surplus with the type of direction that allows it to be redeveloped in a way that works for the community as well. Is that helpful? And just kind of framing? I feel there are enough questions here to really dig into and to try to remind ourselves not to write off anything quite yet.
Trey, is your 22.5 million, does that include any soft costs, or is that just hard costs?
That was just hard costs.
Okay, just so everyone has some perspective, that's $155 a foot. The cost to renovate without any soft costs, when you add that on, is actually more expensive than new construction, and you own the land. If you can build a building for a lot less than 155 plus soft costs, without the land component in place. I'd be actually curious, not that I'm advocating, that's why I asked the question about historic, and that's why I don't know the town of the town, okay? But what demolition costs would be. Okay, because if those numbers are good, and I'm sure they are, because they sound pretty reasonable, given the type of remediation work involved, $155 a foot plus, I don't know what you guys would figure for soft costs, but probably 20 or 30 bucks minimum. You're into this for $200 a foot, you go buy a building, I'll sell you one. I'm kidding. For a lot less than $200 a foot. Okay, so just as a consideration. But your question's a good one, which I asked. And I'm not at all sensitive or insensitive to this. If the town is strongly for, keeping things for historic, then you have to consider that. And you got to work around that. If it's not a consideration, it's purely financial, then the numbers don't lie. Okay, so just FYI.
To back up for a second, the document that Troy and AI3 have put together that talk about those fundamental costs it's going to take to get the building up and running again. There was some very yes/no kind of questions being asked about it. It's the kind of document that can be read and gleaned about, and you collect the inference, oh, we need to do this because of ADA, we need to do this because of restroom codes, and so on and so on and so on through every given system in a building. That's the kind of document I think he's really brought to the table. And then quick numbers were fantastic.
So that, I think that explains a little bit of the challenges and what we need to think about if we're going to reuse it. The one other comment I would make is I think there, personally, I think there's an interest in preserving historic buildings. We went a long way when we put with McKay School out to bid to preserve the portion of that building that had historic value. That project worked. It's a very different building, of course, but I think there is value to adding some importance underlying the need for preserving our historic facilities. And as you well know, there's resources that are potentially available, particularly for private developers that may be able to put into place. That's a consideration, but I think there is certainly value in preserving the building. It's just how does that play out in this broader conversation of whether it's a city use or it's not a city use.
Just one clarification, Tom. That does include soft costs, about 20% soft costs in that number. So just to clarify that.
Even so, you're still at $155, $156 a foot. That's still a pretty big number. I just had one line question, and again, I'm sorry to ask this question, but I'm really new here. Is there a city attorney here by chance? Because the question is this: because I just don't know what municipalities can and can't do on the other side. Can a city build a building and be a landlord? Be a landlord. Okay, could you go build a 150,000 square foot building on the Briscoe site, lease 80,000 of it, and making the number up that you need to satisfy all that you need, and then rent out the rest? There's nothing that precludes you legally from doing that?
I don't believe so, but I would want to understand what all the ramifications are legally. I believe we can. I mean, we've talked about we have put out RFPs to issue a ground lease to a private property owner for a restaurant. So I would expect that would apply to leasable space within a building as well.
Thank you.
But the difficult part is, you say 155 is a square foot is expensive. I don't really want to tell you what we're paying per square foot for a school.
I don't think I really want to know.
We can't build stuff and be competitive.
And that's because of all the requirements and wages and everything else we've been discussing?
I have a question over here at that.
Well, actually, I was going to comment and pretty much said what I was going to say, which is the McKay School is a case where the city took a little less money in order to preserve what was a community resource. 'Cause, you know, there's the history of the building, seeing it from the corner. There's more value to it than just the pure economics, of course. And likewise, I feel, my sense in the community is Briscoe is much the same way. We can build a building for $200 a foot. We can't build that building for $200 a foot. Never mind just the physical presence of the building and the thickness and so forth, but even the history that goes with it, the feeling that goes with it, the stateliness that goes with it. There's value there, which we need to evaluate what it is. My sense is that a private developer can do a much better job with the economics than the public sector, having sat on the middle school building committee. I'd actually argue it's more about 50 cents on the dollar when you account for some of the state requirements, at least in the school case, of funding and so forth. So you can probably build, you know, the private school for about half. And I think that if, in a sense of a private developer working with Briscoe, you'd probably have a fighting chance of making the economics work. You may have to add some additions to it and so forth. My sense is the community, I'm just one person in the community, but I'm listening, has a great value to it. Most everybody went through the school, who went through it before the 50s when they built Memorial, you know, and there's some feeling for it, and it sits where it sits so prominently. I think,
Yeah, it does
generally
have a
speaking, that would be the
presence,
default. If the default would be if you could possibly save it, you would. But
Well,
we
and
are,
it's an important consideration, which is why I asked the question,
Yeah.
because if the city feels that way, then you're limiting yourself on the pure economic. And so then it's, you know, guns and butter from our Econ 101 class, you're trading things off.
Exactly. I think in the case of McKay, there was some less return for the city on the money, but they got the building preserved. And let's face it, there's a tax stream that's coming with that facility that wasn't available when it was a vacant school, and Briscoe would be the same.
Edwards on Rantoul Street is another good example of a, you know, I think it's pretty successful school that was turned into a residential.
Casey?
I just have a question about what the current uses of the auditorium at the Briscoe. Did they go over and above kind of the normal use of the school at this point?
I think there's a church that uses
The church that means right.
That Netcast is
Netcast.
is in there, okay.
It's not, Memorial's auditorium was rented out far more frequently than Briscoe's. It's, you know, it is bigger, it's new, slight, you know, 30 years newer. It's just a little more inviting, a little more commercial, greater commercial appeal. Briscoe has not been much of a draw for any of the, you know, whether it be recitals or things like that. It just doesn't hold much appeal right now.
Does the Briscoe athletic field serve as an asset for Pop Warner or anybody?
It is in circulation, but it's not used much because it's in really poor condition.
So there's the possibility that we could subdivide maybe a piece of land off of that.
So what I'm hearing is what we might want to do between now and the next meeting is identify some of the different uses within Briscoe within the building, particularly the auditorium, some of the ball fields, and understand what is the utilization and how they can play a role. If you know, if the city's not going to retain the building, can they play a role for public benefit in the future? So, does that sound like a fair question to ask and answer? Okay.
Maybe a future meeting should be at Briscoe.
Well, I was just gonna, a nice segue. Yeah, I think the next meeting, we'd like to actually tour the Briscoe building and the site. So what we'll do, we're not gonna try to schedule it right now. One comment I'll just make is we chose 4 o'clock because that just seemed to work for this initial group, this first initial meeting. We'll send out a doodle poll or whatever, some scheduling app to help figure out a time and date. What I would propose, and wouldn't mind some feedback now on this though, that we go to the site relatively soon, so maybe the next 2 to 3 weeks. Is that enough lead time for everybody here? You don't have to commit to a certain day or time. 2 to 3 weeks looks good. I'm seeing some nods. So we'll send something out. Is later in the evening better for folks, generally? Doesn't matter.
You couldn't see it in the light.
Depends
All
on
right.
the day.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll set out some times, and we'll meet at the site and get a walkthrough.
Can I just throw out two last thoughts? One is on renting our buildings or being landlords. We have rented out our school buildings to the North Shore Consortium. We've rented out part of Memorial at one point and all of McEwen. So
Right.
that's something to throw out there. And also, the bus depot is housed at Briscoe right now. And the current plan is for that to be over at the new memorial, or the new middle school site. The neighbors who abut that land are not happy about that, so there's discussion about hoping that we hang on to Briscoe so we can keep the buses over there. So I just wanted that to be part of the consideration. It's, you know, it's a big change for that neighborhood.
All right, any last thoughts before we adjourn? All right, we'll send out an invitation for the site visit. That'll be a fun opportunity. I've actually never been in the building, so I'm looking forward to it. And then my thought after that is we'll meet monthly. If we need to meet more frequently, we'll do so, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Thank you.